So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Elizabeth Boerger. She's here from the University of Mississippi, and unlike the other two talks, she's going to be addressing a different aim of the grant competition, which is the question of moral development.
Okay, so the title of my talk is Relations Among Children's Understanding of Mind, Moral Self-Concept, and Involvement in Prosocial and Antisocial Behavior. So I'll first give you a little bit of an introduction to each of the three components involved in that talk. What I mean by understanding of mind, what I mean by moral self-concept, and involvement in prosocial and antisocial behavior. To begin with, my project focuses on moral development in kids between about 8 and about 13 years of age. From the perspective of developmental psychologists, this is a period or periods of the lifespan that spans middle childhood and early adolescence. It's also a time in children's lives when their social lives are changing a lot. They're moving from primarily social contexts like the home and even a daycare center where they're primarily involved in adults or with peers in ways that are very highly structured and supervised by adults, to a number of contexts where they have a fair amount of independence in initiating and maintaining relationships with their peers in particular. Because they have these new opportunities for independently initiating and maintaining social relationships, they have a lot of opportunities for both prosocial and antisocial behavior. Behavior such as is illustrated in this picture by two friends sharing a toy or playing together cooperatively. They also have opportunities for participating in community service projects such as this gift donation drive for, in this case, it was actually one very poverty-stricken family at Christmas time. So that's the good part of this. But as all of us who have been children know, kids also have increased opportunities for acting in antisocial ways toward each other by physically bullying or aggressing against another child, or by verbally doing so. And as these pictures indicate, one of the things that can be particularly troubling about children's aggression towards each other is that it often does involve groups of kids who will team up on another child in their attacks against him or her. So in these years from 8 to 13, there is increased opportunity for children to engage in both positive behavior that I would say does reflect developing character, but also negative behavior. And we do see stable individual differences in children in the extent to which they choose to engage in positive behaviors, the extent to which their interactions with their friends and other peers are marked by cooperation or a willingness to share, to the extent to which they show interest in being involved in behaviors that help other people, like the donations to charity, and the extent to which they are involved in aggressive acts toward other children. And these stable individual differences are often consistent enough that they can be reported by teachers and peers in ways that are fairly highly correlated. So I think that these are a good way of measuring development, or at least some aspects of character, in children. There is some question about why there are these individual differences in children. One candidate for why children might be more inclined to be involved in negative behaviors rather than positive ones that has been discussed in a lot of the developmental literature on peer relations is the extent to which kids understand other people's thoughts, intentions, beliefs, goals, etc. This is related to my primary area of research which is children's theories of mind or children's understanding of mind. I'll describe that a bit more in a moment, but it simply means that children are increasingly amassing over their childhood years an ability to interpret other people's behavior in terms of those people's desires, their beliefs, their emotions, and to integrate all of that to predict and explain other people's behavior. So that's one aspect of children's developing social cognition that we think should predict how they behave toward other people. It seems logical to think that children who are better able at understanding what people want, what people think, what they intend to do, would be more capable of regulating their own behavior in ways that was sensitive to other people's needs. But as I'll tell you in more detail later, it doesn't explain all the differences that we see among children. So it's also important to look at some other aspects of their developing personalities or their developing lives. And one that I am looking at in this project is their sense of self. To what extent is being a moral person, being kind, honest, fair, responsible, important to them? Do they think that they have these traits? And if they do, is that something that helps them to feel good about themselves? So that aspect, moral self-concept, is the other thing that I'm looking at in this project. Okay, a little bit about theory of mind, because that's where I initially came from. As this cartoon suggests, human beings are very, very social people, and as social people, it's important for us to know what other people are thinking. So we're always looking for information about how other people are understanding the situation they're in, what they're thinking, how they're likely to behave. Developmental research indicates that by the time children are 4 years of age, they've developed a naive theory that enables them to integrate information about other people's desires and beliefs in order to predict what people will do. And as they get older, at 6, 7, 8 years of age, they also increasingly are able to understand how a false belief, for example, will affect somebody's emotions. How believing, for example, Little Red Riding Hood, believing that her grandmother is in the house in bed waiting for her arrival, will feel happy going toward her house, even though in reality the big bad wolf is in that bed. Children who are younger than about 6 tend to think that Little Red Riding Hood will feel scared in that situation, but by 6 they understand that she'll be happy. As children get older, they also come to understand that people with different desires or interpretations of the same event might feel happy or sad. If someone wants a bike for their birthday, they'll be very happy to get one. But if what they really wanted was a computer, then they might be really unhappy to receive a bike. So they're becoming more sophisticated in understanding how people's individual desires and interpretation of events affect their emotions. They're also beginning to understand to a much greater extent that people are not just thinking about the world, they're also thinking about what other people are thinking. And that social interaction involves all this mutual recursive thinking about what other people are thinking, having feelings about what other people are thinking, and responding to that back and forth. As they learn this gives them much greater understanding of things like jokes, irony, and even what a promise is. It's not really until children understand that people have thoughts about other people's thoughts that they can understand the distinction between casually mentioning that you might do something later and actually promising to do it with someone else later, and that those two different circumstances should lead the person who thought they were going to do something with this person to respond differently if the person is detained, for example. So if someone says, oh, I think I'll go to the pool this afternoon, and their friend decides later, I'll join him at the pool. If the first person doesn't show up, if it was just an idle conversation, As adults, we wouldn't be angry at the other person. But children actually, up until almost 7, 8, 9 years of age, do tend to be angry and to blame people for these kind of unintended events because they don't understand as much about theory of mind. So, between 7 and 13, we know that there is ongoing development in children's understanding of the social world in terms of how people think about other people's beliefs. So that's the theory of mind aspect of it. Now, it's long been believed that children who are more advanced in their theory of mind ability will have advantages in social interactions and will be more socially competent than other children. They will have more friends, they will be able to interact with adults better, they will be less likely to victimize other children. But the research on this question is conflicting. There certainly are studies that show that children with more advanced theory of mind skills, particularly second-order theory of mind and affective perspective taking, being able to attribute emotions accurately in complex situations, are related to more positive teacher and peer ratings of children's social competence. There are also studies in which children and adolescents have been asked to rate their own prosocial behavior and their own involvement in aggression that do show positive correlations with between advanced theory of mind and prosocial behavior and negative correlations between theory of mind and aggression. So this sort of supports the idea that understanding of mind is important to prosocial social development or character development. But it's certainly not the only thing, because there also are an increasing number of studies that show that children with more advanced TOM or theory of mind split into two different groups. On the one hand, there are children who have good theory of mind skills who are very prosocial, who help others, who are the children who would be nominated to be involved in some difficult social situation involving a lot of tact, who look out for other people. But there are also children with very good, very advanced theory of mind skills, particularly having to do with thinking about what other people want and what's going to make them want something or behave some way, who also are very aggressive and are seen as popular bullies, or kids who are sort of central to the social network in their school or other environment, but also are highly aggressive toward other kids. This is really kind of distressing research. This isn't stuff that we would like to see in kids. So it's important to figure out what's going on, why some kids are using their ability to make accurate inferences about what other people want, what other people's goals are, and how they're going to attempt to reach those goals to help them, and others would use them to hurt them. My hypothesis is that what's different is, and this is based on some research, is a motivational factor. Children have different motives in how they engage with other kids. Some kids feel it's important to be kind, responsible, helpful, etc. Other kids may find or feel that it's more important to have power. So there could be a motivational aspect here that influences whether children use their understanding of other people's minds to help them or hurt them. The factor that I'm looking at is what might be called, well, actually, moral self-concept and moral identity. Self-concept is a very highly studied construct, especially in developmental literature. And it refers to children's beliefs about the abilities, traits, and characteristics that make up who they are. And by 7 years of age and increasingly into adolescence, kids are able to identify their own personality traits. And they're able to describe themselves, for example, as, say, being very good at English, even, or in academics generally, perhaps less good at sports, able to conduct themselves well in school, so having good behavioral self-concept, and being about average in terms of social acceptance, or how well they're liked by other kids. So children are beginning to develop a fairly abstracted understanding of what their traits are by observing their own behavior over time. The children also have some understanding of their own behavior relative to moral traits. Although these have been studied less frequently, they are beginning to understand that they are kind, or that they are honest, or perhaps that they're less honest, especially relative to other kids. So moral self-concept would refer to their beliefs about which character traits they have. Moral identity is a slightly different, but I think important, related concept. It was developed by Aquino and Reed in 2002, and they were studying adults. What moral identity is, it's a person's belief about how important to their own identity it is to have particular moral traits. So according to Aquino and Reed, there are some people for whom it's very important to have moral traits, to be like someone who is kind, compassionate, fair, courageous, honest, etc. For other people, being like someone who has those traits is not so important. Other traits are more important to some people than being moral. This has been studied in adults and adolescents. So Aquino and Reed, for example, found that being high in moral identity is related to how much college students will donate to a charity drive, a charity food drive. They also found that how high someone is on moral identity is related to the extent to which they are distressed by reports of human rights abuses. The example was the treatment of prisoners at Abu Ghraib by U.S. soldiers. People who are high on moral identity find it more difficult to disengage from their horror at that behavior and say it's okay because it was our soldiers. So moral identity seems important as a potential motivating factor for how children will behave. So one goal of my research has been to extend the research on moral identity down to a younger age group, kids between 8 and 13. Two additional questions, the main questions of my work are, is moral identity related to children's involvement in prosocial versus antisocial behavior? And can moral identity explain why some children with highly developed theory of mind skills are popular bullies? And now I'm going to have to go fairly quickly. So an overview of the method. This was a school-based study. So I actually interviewed the children in their elementary school or their middle school. There was a total of 5 grades, 3rd through 7th grade. And the study involved assessing individual differences in their self-concept, their understanding of mind, and their moral identity as independent variables, and to measure their character, I assessed their behavior through self-report of behavioral conduct and moral traits, So this is saying this is like me, this is not like me. Peer reports of aggression, prosocial behavior, and also social preference. Teacher reports of aggression, prosocial behavior, and also victimization by other kids. And the child's involvement in 2 community service activities. Before I move on, I want to say a little bit about the school district where I collected these data. So as Laura mentioned, I'm from the University of Mississippi, which is in Oxford, Mississippi. I collected this data in a town called Water Valley, which is about 20 miles south of Oxford. It's the county seat of Yalobusha County, where there's a fairly high level of poverty. According to the 2010, it's a small town. According to the 2010 census, 32% of families with children under 18 in Yalobusha County were living under the poverty line. That's in comparison to 27% in Mississippi as a whole. So Mississippi as a whole is a poor state, but Yalobusha County and Water Valley, where I collected these data, is a fairly poor area. Okay. It's also racially mixed, about 59% white, 41% African American. Okay, moving on. Okay, the measures I used 2 story tasks that studied theory of mind, 2 particular aspects of theory of mind, in particular affective perspective taking, understanding how someone will feel in a new and scary situation when you don't quite know what other people are thinking about you, and understanding recursive perspective taking. He thinks that I think that he doesn't know what I want, that sort of thing. I measured their self-concept with a very commonly used measure of children's self-concept, the harder perception. Can't remember the name of it right now. Harder perception, children's self-perception scale. It measures children's academic, athletic, behavioral conduct, social acceptance, and one other aspect of their self-concept. I added to this 6 questions related to their moral traits. So I added questions on how fair they felt they were, how honest, how kind, etc. I measured their moral identity with a measure modified from Aquino and Reed to be more friendly to children. So I basically just rewrote the questions using simpler words. Their social behavior in the peer group. Each child in the study not rated or nominated children from their own grade level on how often that child was involved in aggression, how often that child was involved in helping others, how often that child was victimized by others. And so we also threw in filler items like who in this class is really good at hunting and fishing, which was a popular one in Mississippi. And we also measured altruism. We measured altruism by having them be involved in writing letters to chronically sick children. We introduced this as a group activity to all the kids in each grade at the beginning of the study, and then had letter boxes in their classrooms so that they were able to continue writing letters and do it privately through the school year. We also had a task where they were given $5 as $1 bills and were given the opportunity to donate some or all of it to the local food pantry. So let's see. I'm going to skip through this. Because this was done in a school, it did require some very careful sequencing of the events. But roughly, we did a group session in December in which they did the harder scale. We did a group session in January in which we had them all write letters to a sick child and taught them how to do that and gave them materials so that they could continue to do it throughout the school year. We then had 2 individual interview sessions with each child. Each of these individual interview sessions lasted 20 to 30 minutes. we did 191 of the first interview session in February and March, and then the second session in March and April. A mad rush to be finished by the end of the school year. And we also collected teacher questionnaires on kids' social behavior. The data, so I've collected the data at this point, but I haven't had time to really analyze it extensively. Most of the effort was in just doing the interviews this year. But I do have a little bit on the money donation procedures. This was a procedure that was unexpectedly quite controversial with the Institutional Review Board that reviewed my project for potential human rights problems. And part of it was related to the fact that I was doing this research in a very low-income area. So the concerns were, would parents pressure children either to donate the money, thinking this is a good thing to do, my child should donate the money, or to bring it home? If parents were putting pressure on children for what to do, would that cause the children to experience stress? So would it be a risk for the children's emotional well-being? And would the data be valid? I was able to look through the literature and find studies with low-income children that had used a very similar task and find that there were no reports of the children saying they had been pressured about what to do or experienced any negative consequences. So the IRB did allow me to go forward with it, but asked me to interview the children afterwards to find out if they had had any conversations with parents or others about it, and if they had felt any coercion. So let me quickly give you some data on this. Well, okay, I'll skip through that. Just some visuals. This is, well, the one I really want to point out. This is my wonderful research team. This research would have been totally and completely impossible without them, so I do want to thank them. The money donation procedure. For each child, we gave them $5. We said, I want to thank you for helping me out with the study. Here's $5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is your money to do whatever you want with. Some children want to save it. Some children want to buy something they want or need. And they would sign a little receipt. And then we would show them the donation box, which is just a little box like this, and say, well, as part of this study, we are asking children if they want to donate some money to the Compassion Food Ministries. Do you know what the Compassion Food Ministries are? Well, it's a group here in Water Valley that helps out people who don't have enough to eat. Some of the people are old people who can't work anymore. Some of the people are families like yours that have kids and they don't have enough to eat. If you want, and then we'd give them a little envelope with their participant ID number on it and say, if you want to give some of your money, you can put some or all of your money in this envelope and put it in the box while I step away. But if you don't, you can just put the empty envelope in the box and you can keep the money. So that's how we did it. And we put a little cardboard screen up and step away. And then they would make their decision and we'd come back. And then we would debrief them. And the questions were basically, before I told you, gave you the money today, did you know you were going to get money? Did you know I was going to ask you to donate some of the money? Did anybody talk to you about what you should do with the money? Parents, peers? What did they tell you to do? And if they said that somebody had talked to them, how did that make you feel? So we did that little debriefing. Then we thanked them again, and they were all finished. So we did this with 191 children. So we gave out a total of $955. Of that $955, the children donated $311 to the local food pantry. I have a little bit of data on who the children were who donated and how age affected that. So there was a significant increase with age in the amount of money donated. And this has been found in other research as well. The significant change was between 5th and 6th grade. The 6th and 7th graders did on average give $1 more, about $2.50, than the younger children, who gave an average of about $1.50. But importantly, within each grade, there were some children who kept the money for themselves, and some children who donated. So within each grade level, there was at least one child who gave all $5, as well as some children who didn't give any at all. What changed with age was the percentage of children who gave nothing or only $1 decreased, and the percentage of children who gave $4 or $5 increased. Very quickly. One question the IRB was concerned about, and so I was concerned about finding something out about very quickly in my analyses, was whether the money donation procedure was correlated with the other measures of children's positive character traits or negatively related to the negative ones, as well as whether teachers and kids' ratings on those things correlated. What this shows are, across the top are the teachers' ratings of the children's prosocial behavior, aggression, and victimization. And vertically are the children's self-reports of their moral traits and their behavioral conduct from the harder self-concept scale. And the measures were correlated in the way that you would expect. What about with money donation? So the amount of money was correlated with the teachers' ratings of prosocial behavior. It was not significantly correlated with aggression, and it was not significantly correlated to victimization. I don't believe that the money was, I think I don't have a slide up here about the kids' ratings because it didn't correlate with the kids' own ratings of their behavior. Which I think means that at this age, their ability to assess their own moral traits is maybe not that great. No, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Yeah, no, I was right. It did not correlate with their own assessments. In terms of the debriefing, fairly few children admitted knowing about the money in advance. We kind of wondered about this because actually the money donation was the last thing we did with kids, so they had seen us there at the school lots of times, and a lot of times they said, is this the time you're going to give us the money? And then when we asked them about the money, very few of them said they knew about it. 26 children said they knew about the donation. 4 said someone had talked to them. The children whose parents had said something to them about it had mostly said that they wanted them to make their own decision. In general, or donate. In general, kids who had talked with someone about the procedure beforehand said that they felt very, very good about it. So that is, I think I'm out of time, and that is the small amount of data that I have to present to you, so I'll end there.
We have about 10 minutes for questions, yeah?
Hi, I have a question about the experiment measuring altruism.
Yes.
So I should
The money donation part of it?
Right. So I should preface this by saying I'm a philosopher, not a psychologist, so I don't know that I have really great suggestions on how I would do it differently, but here's my worry. My worry is that it's kind of a crude analysis in a sense of what altruism would be. So it seems like it's like altruism equals giving more money. But you might think, well, that kind of depends. Like, so you mentioned, for example, that about 35% of the kids in this area are under the poverty line, and the money's going to a food bank, right? So I could sort of see, this seems a little sophisticated for a child, but you might think,
I
like,
see where you're going.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
very sophisticated.
Yeah. Well,
But if they
right.
have a very good theory of mind, they might get there.
Right. But you could see someone thinking something like, well, look, I mean, if my family's below the poverty line, they might be eligible for going to the food bank. Should I be donating the money to the food bank or just give it to my parents or something? My point being, if they're in that situation, then not giving the money might not reflect on their altruism in the same way. So in other words, how altruistic you are isn't just a matter of, measuring how much money you give, but also how much money you give relative to your perceived resources, so on and so forth. Like you think of even all the way back to the widow's mite, right? Like the little parable.
Well, that's definitely, I did want to have, I included both the letter writing project and the money donation because I wanted to have some direct observation of kids' prosocial behavior, not just the reports from the teachers, not just the reports from their peers. It also is consistent with the types of measures that are used in the adult literature to validate the idea of moral identity. But I was, especially being in Mississippi and working with kids, I was concerned to have something that wouldn't be so like I didn't want to do a food drive because with kids, whether they contribute to a food drive really depends on whether their parents give them something to bring in. And I wanted it as much as I could possibly make it that way, be it that they had the same amount to possibly give. And of course, I couldn't overcome any individual differences in their actual family background situation, and I don't have data on their family.
That was going to be my follow-up. I was curious if
I don't have data on the individual kids' income level, so it's a rough estimate.
Yeah.
But I think giving them all something to start with and then asking them to give back, I think does give some idea of how willing they are to be generous with what they do have. In the initial analyses that I did do, looking at how it relates to the other reports of behavior, I did control for age because that is something that seems to affect it apart from everything else. It appears things about money, familiarity with money, knowledge about money also correlate with how much kids give. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that development in children is, for me personally, also a very interesting topic, and I think there is already like a broad literature in temperament research, for example. Then we call it maybe sociability or personality. There is really broad literature by now that shows that agreeableness, for example, you can measure it in kids, and it is already in kids, especially between 8 and 13. It's quite stable. You can measure even younger in kids 4 or 5. There's with the with puppet tests, for example. So there are different measures, not only self and peer reports. And I was wondering where the perspective taking part is here, because I can see that this is one behavioral indicator of being agreeable or being sociable, or call it, or give it another name maybe, but where's the perspective taking part here?
Well, it's not in this data that I've presented.
Okay, so
Right
did you miss
here.
anything?
No, you didn't, and I really so the measures that I used that measured advanced theory of mind, they were story tasks in which I would read a story involving, each of these stories involved at least 3 characters, and kids were given some information about what was going on, and then they were asked to answer questions about the various characters' emotions and what they were going to do. So just to give you an example, this was from the Boerger and Astington ambiguous social situations, and they were told Nancy and Margie are watching the other kids in the playground. Without a word, Nancy nudges Margie and looks across the playground at the new girl swinging on the swing set. Then Nancy looks back at Margie and smiles. Margie nods, and the two of them start off toward the girl at the swing set. The new girl sees the strange girls walk towards her. She'd seen them nudging and smiling at each other. although they are in the same class, she has never spoken to them before. So that's the situation. And then the questions are about, well, what does the new girl feel? What does the new girl think Margie and Nancy are, why does she think they're coming toward her? So the kids have to generate a response that relates to their...
I can see. So you are measuring that, but for me the question is, so what are you assuming? Do you think this is the part of that triggers the development in agreeableness? Is it, do you think...
No, I see these as two separate aspects of children's developing personalities, or two separate traits. So I think I see agreeableness as part of temperament. I'm not a temperament researcher, so I'm not a real expert there. But I do think that there exist relatively stable individual differences in those types of behavioral tendencies or emotional tendencies. But those are distinct from understanding how other people think and feel. And I think that's a separate thing that varies in fairly stable ways among kids, how oriented someone is toward thinking about someone else's thoughts and emotions. But the thing about, one of the things that is difficult in theory of mind research and looking at how theory of mind relates to other social traits or social behaviors is that the tasks that we have for measuring theory of mind were initially developed to study developmental change, not individual differences. So they are often used just to say, okay, so when do kids understand this? Do they understand it at 8? Do they understand it at 10? And so,
in general,
so they're not used quite as much as individual difference variables, and that sometimes leads to some difficulties. I hope that these ones have been used to measure individual differences as well as developmental change. So hopefully they will pick up on important differences in the kids. Yeah.
So I'm a philosopher too, so excuse me if I'm asking an ignorant question. But the difference in age with the money seems to be suggestive of the development of moral identity in those children. But here's my question though, the way that Aquino and Reed define moral identity is the extent to which an individual considers having moral traits as important to his or her sense of self.
Right.
So I'm wondering if, the trend that you saw in those children giving money isn't really about the sense of self, but about what it would be good to do. So there's a difference between what it's good to do and what it's good for me, how it's good for me to be. And I wonder if you can enlighten me as to how that difference plays out in what you're doing, or if you've looked at that difference in your research.
I don't have any. I don't have any measures looking directly at what kids think good character traits are. In general, I do have the questions. I do, and I haven't looked at them yet, so I don't know whether they're related to that age difference at all. I do have whether they see themselves as having those traits, whether they think it's important to their sense of self to have those traits, and whether it's important to their sense of self to be seen by others as having those traits, so the symbolization aspect of it. But I am sort of making an assumption that they see those as good traits. But in terms of just a social desirability issue, if that's sort of what you're getting at, I don't have anything that directly...
I'm getting at the difference between acting and being, or doing things and then being a certain kind of person. Because the moral identity issue seems to be about who you are.
Right.
And then, but of course, what you're measuring are actions.
Well, but I'm measuring, so I'm measuring their self-report of whether they see that as being an important part of themselves, and then looking at whether it's related to their actions. Just here, one little action. And then with the letter writing thing, another little action, although I have to say, just not having looked at the data real closely, I don't think that worked. We basically didn't get any letters after the first time, so just very few, so I don't think I got much there. And then looking at the other reports, which are other people, their own and other people's sense of who they are and how they act on a day-to-day basis. So I think with all of those different measures, of course it's not perfect, but it gets kind of a spread of different ways of saying, is this someone who does consistently behave in a moral way? So,
That's all the time we have for questions, but I'm sure you'll all be happy to ask more at lunch.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.